The war with the Labyrinth had gone on for decades under a black sky. Masked creatures and armored figures clashed across ruined ground beneath glowing eyes. At last, the survivors above ground raised a flag and claimed victory. Tens of thousands of Labyrinth masters released prisoners after their defeat. Crowds filed out from dark tunnels into a pale sunrise. Among them were babies born in the maze, silent in arms. Their mothers had already died, and the infants were left without kin. A cloaked figure fed one by a red moon, a strange milk from the monsters. After the labyrinth fell, survivors pushed into its mouth and found small shapes in the dark. The children crawled out and blinked into the pale sun, while soldiers circled and watched closely. Men whispered that the children held strange power and were too strong to be treated as normal humans. Leaders labeled them Dungeon Baby and argued over housing or work assignments for the youngsters. One soot-streaked child, Cal, sat quietly as an adult soothed him and murmured that it was safe. The gathered survivors debated and exchanged offers of food, shelter, and labor under tired eyes. After the labyrinth collapsed, survivors gathered inside its mouth and argued over the children. Soldiers circled and offered food, shelter, and labor assignments, while leaders called the youngsters Dungeon Baby. One soot-streaked child, Cal, sat silent as an adult softly soothed him. A cloaked figure observed from the shadows, while others weighed safety, housing, and work. Two soldiers stepped forward and pledged to protect all babies in the camp. Tension tightened as decisions loomed and rumors about the children's strange power passed from lip to lip. The gathered group braced for verdicts. After the camp argued, a hulking monster crept from a fissure and spoke in a ragged voice. An adolescent, Cal, flinched and shouted for the soldiers not to shoot. Two above-ground victors raised rifles despite his plea and fired after a beat. The rifles barked, and the monster lunged forward into the muzzle flashes. Bullets tore into its flank, and it howled before collapsing across the stone floor. Men in uniforms moved in, checked wounds, and kept rifles trained on the carcass. The gathered crowd held its breath and watched officers bark sharp orders. Tension trembled in the camp as the dying animal rasped and bodies counted risks. After the carcass fell, the above-ground victors clustered and traded bitter laughter. Officers kept rifles visible while men cracked crude jokes. They mocked the animal and argued about whether to push deeper into the tunnels. The group reformed and marched in a loose column down the passage. Footsteps and distant echoes carried ahead until an unfamiliar sound froze them. An older soldier voiced concern, and the camp stilled. A dark-haired youth answered the moment with a single steady command to fight. The carcass drew cruel laughter from the above-ground victors before they reorganized into a loose column. Officers kept rifles visible while men argued whether to push further into the tunnels. Footsteps and distant echoes carried until an unfamiliar sound froze the group. The older soldier voiced his concern aloud, and the camp fell silent. The dark-haired youth answered with a single steady command and stepped forward. A few children watched from the rear as torches lit ragged faces. The unit followed as he led them deeper into the dark corridor. The above-ground victors had laughed at the carcass, then reformed into a loose column. Officers held rifles as men argued over pushing further into the tunnels. Footsteps and distant echoes carried until an unfamiliar sound halted their debate. The older soldier voiced concern aloud, and the camp fell silent. The dark-haired youth stepped forward and issued a single command to leave. A few children watched from the rear as torches lit ragged faces. Some called the youth a coward, but he stayed steady and led them deeper into the dark corridor. The above-ground victors fell into a heated hush as torches lit worried faces. The older soldier raised doubts, while the dark-haired youth steadied the group and ordered them onward. A young companion asked what happened. The youth answered, and a helmeted figure aimed a camera toward the tunnel. The lens found pale shapes moving in the dark, and then a massive creature lunged into view. Screams burst out as the thing snarled and clattered forward. The camp scattered into shadow as the monstrous maw filled the frame and someone cried for help. Torches had lit worried faces as the camera lens found pale shapes in the dark. A massive maw filled the frame and the thing lunged at the camp. Panic scattered the survivors and screams tore through the tunnel. A companion fell and begged for help while blood stained the ground. The dark-haired youth watched without flinching, then stepped forward into the attack. He moved cold and precise, eyes fixed on the creature's rhythm. The monster snarled and showed more teeth as it lunged again. The camp braced behind him, and silence tightened around the confrontation. Torches lit worried faces in the tunnel as a maw filled the frame. The creature lunged at the camp, and survivors scattered in panic. A companion fell, blood staining the ground while others begged for help. The dark-haired youth stepped forward without flinching and met the attack. He moved cold and precise, blades flashing to cut and parry. His strike split the creature's defense and drew a fresh wound. The beast roared, staggered, and its limbs flailed in pain. After the clash, a red word pulsed above the scene: weakness detection. After the earlier clash, the dark-haired youth vaulted and drove his blade down. He cut through the creature's guard and cleaved a major limb, forcing the beast to collapse. The creature hit the ground and pinned a small figure beneath its weight. Flames and dust settled as the youth landed and scanned the prone body, eyes narrowing. A child gasped repeatedly behind the creature's limbs, while survivors watched from the tunnel edge. The red weakness detection indicator pulsed above the scene. The pulse confirmed the strike's effect as urgent breaths filled the air. After the strike, the dark-haired youth vaulted and drove his blade downward with precision. He cut through the creature's guard and sheared a major limb, forcing the beast down. The creature crashed, crushing a small figure beneath its weight as dust fell. Flames and scalding debris settled while the youth landed and scanned the prone body. A child gasped repeatedly behind the creature's limbs as survivors watched from the tunnel edge. A red weakness detection indicator pulsed over the scene, confirming the strike's urgent effect. Tense questions followed as a young girl demanded answers about the fallen others. After the strike settled, survivors clustered at the tunnel lip and argued over losses. Young girl confronted dark-haired youth, accusing him of failing to protect them despite being hired. He replied that he was hired as a guide, not as a guard. She insisted people still died and demanded accountability. He shifted blame toward their choices and their orders, then asked if she was wrong. The exchange frayed into threats and pleas. Dark-haired youth finally said he remained on duty and extended his hand, igniting a faint flame as proof. After their argument had eased, survivors searched the broken ground and found a carved emblem. Dark-haired youth examined the mark and warned that it worked against straightforward navigation. They agreed to leave quickly to avoid becoming trapped by any hidden effect. Suddenly the ground split open and a spiraling void yawned in the rubble. Young girl and another survivor screamed and stumbled back from the sucking pit. Dark-haired youth froze, eyes wide, while the others stared at the hole. A cloaked figure stepped from shadow at the pit's lip and arrested every breath. After the group's dispute had cooled, they searched the shattered ground and uncovered a carved seal. Dark-haired youth reeled from pain, gripped his arm, and slid down among loose stones. He crouched and examined the seal, a coiled serpent inside a circular compass. He moved to the rim and stared down into a spiraling pit that yawned below the emblem. He spoke quietly, naming the mark and measuring the void with a steady gaze. The scene held a charged hush as the group waited, and the symbol lay exposed in the rubble. After the emblem was exposed, dark-haired youth lowered himself to the spiraling pit and stared into its depths. He had named the mark and measured the void with a steady gaze before any other action. A massive serpent lunged through the opening and struck with jaws widening around him. Coils wrapped him and slammed him against carved stone while he fought and cursed. He forced out a named release shown in bright text while a voice intoned inheritance. The others at the rim recoiled in silence as the pit's darkness deepened. After the emblem had been exposed, the pit had swallowed the light around the rim. The serpent had struck and rapped the challenger against the carved stone as others recoiled. A disembodied voice had intoned inheritance, while bright script had named the release. The page then cut to a framed tableau showing two companions and a hooded figure. A bold title declared Dungeon Odyssey, and a large numeral marked the chapter. The presentation froze the moment for the reader to breathe and to judge what came next. After the presentation had frozen on the hooded tableau, the view returned to the labyrinth's cavern. The dark-haired youth lay on the stone and blinked until his vision steadied. He spoke to himself and decided he would leave the pit at once. He rose, clenched his fist, and moved toward the cave mouth. A pale light revealed a collapsed figure near the entrance. He hurried over, knelt, and lifted the young girl into his arms. She murmured about having no one left and reached for him. He listened, hardened his resolve, and carried her back into the cave. After he had carried the young girl into the cave, the dark-haired youth climbed out toward daylight. He stepped onto the street and announced, "I'm back." He crossed to a nearby building and entered a small, sparsely furnished apartment. He placed the young girl down and moved to a low table. He switched on a compact television and then picked up his phone. He read the messages on the screen and held the device close. He did not speak. He remained still in the quiet room, his expression closed and watchful for any reply. He stayed in the small room and held the phone against his palm. The young girl moved close and handed him a folded handkerchief with a worried look. He accepted it without speaking and folded his hands around the cloth. A stern older soldier then entered the doorway and demanded explanations about their plans and family. The conversation grew sharp and brief. The group dressed and moved toward the stairs, tension trailing each step. At the landing, the dark-haired youth finally curved his mouth into a small grin and spoke one short, defiant word before they left. Cal stayed in the small room with the phone pressed to his palm. The young girl stepped close and offered a folded handkerchief. He accepted it without speaking and wrapped his hands around the cloth. An older soldier entered and demanded explanations about their plans and family. The group dressed and moved toward the stairs, tension trailing each step. At the landing, the dark-haired youth curved his mouth into a small grin. He spoke one short, defiant word, and they left. Back inside the room, the older soldier confronted the dark-haired youth again. The youth remained calm and produced a package, handing it to the young girl. A terse exchange mentioned family ties and responsibility before the older soldier exited. After the older soldier left, the dark-haired youth shut the door and stood alone. He unfolded a small packet and revealed a round token with markings. He fitted the token to the ring at his collar, and the device engaged. A green holographic interface opened, and a disembodied voice began to speak. Lines of data and dossiers scrolled in the space beside him. He scanned names and locations, eyes calm, fingers flicking through records. When the feed ended, he sat back and let the screen fade. He let the holographic feed fade and returned his attention to the dossier list. He noticed a corrupted entry and tapped it to expand further details. The interface glitched and a green ribbon of light extended across the floor. Glass and data shards scattered as a snake-shaped projection burst into form and slammed into him. He hit the floor and rolled, chest heaving, eyes fixed on a circular medallion set in the debris. The medallion showed a coiled serpent he recognized from a past place. He sat up and an unreadable smile crossed his face briefly then. He ended the feed, then examined the corrupted dossier entry on the table. A snake-shaped projection had burst from the interface and struck him violently. Glass and data shards scattered, and the medallion with a coiled serpent lay exposed. The dark-haired youth rose and squared his shoulders against the looming attacker. A cloaked figure bearing a snake mask lunged, and the youth struck back immediately. They traded blows until the attacker grabbed him and slammed him hard to the floor. Pinned beneath the cloak, he spat defiance and promised to reclaim what he had lost. He ended the feed and examined the corrupted dossier. A snake-shaped projection burst from the interface and struck him. Shards of glass and data scattered, and the medallion with a coiled serpent lay exposed. The dark-haired youth rose and braced against the attacker. A cloaked figure wearing a snake mask lunged, and they traded blows. The figure slammed the youth to the floor and pinned him beneath the cloak. The youth spat defiance and promised to reclaim what had been taken. The cloak answered with a cold taunt, then stepped back into shadow. The youth glared up, breathing pain and resolve. He ended the feed and examined the corrupted dossier. A snake-shaped projection burst from the interface and struck him, scattering glass and data and exposing a cold serpent medallion. The dark-haired youth rose and braced. A cloaked figure lunged and pinned him to the floor after they traded blows. The youth spat defiance and vowed to reclaim the medallion. The cloak taunted, then retreated. He gathered the medallion and tried to leave. A young girl burst in, teased him about streaming, hugged him, and asked if he would come back. He deflected but did not deny it. He ended the feed and examined the corrupted dossier, feeling the coiled medallion in his palm. He had traded blows with a cloaked figure and reclaimed the token. Alone, he tried to leave. A young girl stopped him and teased him about streaming. She hugged him and asked if he would come back. He deflected but admitted he left his camera in the labyrinth and intended to retrieve it. He promised to return and stepped toward the door. Beyond the threshold, a monster sat inside a glass case, motionless, and watched the hall. He cut the live feed and inspected the corrupted dossier while the medallion coiled in his palm. He had taken the token from the cloaked figure after a short fight. Alone, he tried to leave, but a young girl stopped him and hugged him. He admitted he left his camera in the labyrinth and planned to retrieve it. He stepped toward the door and found a monster sitting inside a glass case watching the hall. The dark-haired youth froze in the doorway, eyes wide and unblinking as silence pressed and he gripped the medallion. The dark-haired youth had still gripped the medallion when the live feed shifted. He watched a stark banner fill the screen. Bright letters offered recruitment for Korean translators and a Discord link. A hooded emblem occupied the corner, while neon colors dominated the frame. The sudden advertisement contradicted the hush after the monster in the glass case. The young girl stayed close as the group hesitated at the doorway. The feed offered no answers, only an invitation that felt like a challenge. The dark-haired youth kept his hold on the medallion as the live feed flipped to a title card. Neon colors and bold letters announced recruitment and a Discord link, while a hooded emblem occupied the corner. The card read Dungeon Odyssey, and a number 3 pulsed beside it. Usura Scan's credits and a web address appeared beneath illustrated figures on the left. The cloaked figure loomed on the right with masked features and glowing eyes. The young girl stayed near the doorway as the group froze, unsure whether the message offered aid or a challenge. After the medallion feed ended, the dark-haired youth's attention snapped inward. He recoiled at a sudden thought about Hyunj's money and called out without thinking. The young girl appeared at the doorway and apologized for arriving late, speaking quickly to ease the moment. They traded a few awkward lines, she thanked him, and she turned to leave. He watched her go, felt exposed by their close proximity, and mouthed an apology to Hyunj. The scene closed with his hand on the doorknob and the room falling quiet. After the room fell silent, the dark-haired youth opened the door and stepped into the corridor. He moved across slate floor and discovered a small glowing medallion on the ground. A green serpentine script formed in the air and addressed him in the labyrinth voice. He read the demand and reeled. He shouted at the voice and questioned stolen pieces. His voice echoed against stone. The sequence closed on a sealed door carved with a serpent emblem and 2 silhouetted figures. After his outburst, the dark-haired youth slumped into the chair and clenched his fists. He inspected the small glowing medallion resting in his lap and frowned at it. A holographic map pulsed beside him, displaying locked nodes and a red failure marker. He whispered that he had no key and could not open the marked paths. He cycled through menu options and watched the layout shift into new corridors. Silence settled, and he tested the medallion again until the glow dimmed. He resolved to find whatever key could unlock the serpent-carved door beyond the sealed arch. The final panel showed the heavy door, stamped with a serpent emblem and silence. After his outburst, the dark-haired youth slumped and studied the small, glowing medallion in his lap. A holographic map pulsed beside him, showing locked nodes and a red failure marker. He cycled through menu options and watched corridor layouts shift across the projection. He muttered that he lacked a key and tested the device until its light dimmed. A crest and route title flashed, then a serpent-emblazoned seal appeared on the map. He rose and moved toward the mapped arch. A disembodied voice promised reward should he open the door, leaving the challenge unresolved. After his outburst, the dark-haired youth sat and inspected the glowing medallion in his lap. A holographic map flickered at his side and showed locked nodes and a serpent seal. He cycled through options and watched corridors rearrange beneath the projection. A disembodied labyrinth voice promised reward should he open the arch. The map signaled synchronization and the floor cracked, revealing a vast hall and a cloaked figure on a distant throne. He rose and said the device worked better than before. The dark-haired youth approached the newly opened arch and peered into the dark hall. He crossed the threshold, and the cavernous interior revealed shattered banners and a distant throne. A small pink denizen noticed him and shouted a demand challenging his presence. The creature fumbled with words and flinched when the youth remained motionless. From the throne, the cloaked figure remained still and watched without rising. The scene tensed as unseen mechanisms clicked, and the labyrinth voice offered no reprieve. The youth steadied himself and met the watcher's gaze. The dark-haired youth entered the shadowed hall and scanned its ruined banners and distant throne. A small pink denizen spotted him and erupted into a piercing tirade. It screamed for money, pointed accusingly, then threatened death when ignored by them. From the throne, the cloaked figure stayed motionless, observing without rising or speaking. The youth held himself steady, one hand outstretched, refusing to escalate the confrontation. He said he had nothing to give, meeting the creature's furious stare without fear. The denizen lunged, snarling, and the young woman braced as chaos threatened to erupt. After the denizen's tirade and the cloaked figure's stillness, the dark-haired youth found a bright red stone tucked in rubble. He cupped it and named it a dawn gem. Narration boxes described different gem types, their power and scarcity, and their worth as trophies. He climbed a massive carcass to survey the ruined hall while the older soldier watched with growing unease. The youth kept the gem close, face set. A sudden high-pitched screech erupted nearby. Startled, they flinched as motion blurred and colored lights, gems, skittered into the dust. The dark-haired youth cupped the bright stone and called it a dawn gem. He climbed the carcass and kept the other gem close while the older soldier watched. A high-pitched screech split the hall. A small denizen lunged and seized a blue gem as gems skittered across the dust. Voices barked an order to shoot. The youth moved through the chaos, snatched a stray gem, and sprinted. He set the recovered gem on a bare plinth near the altar. A cloaked silhouette lingered in the doorway and did not move. After chaos in the hall, he had grabbed a stray gem and placed it on the plinth. Gems had skittered across dust as a small denizen lunged for one. Voices had barked sharp orders while soldiers hurried into position and raised their weapons. A cloaked silhouette had lingered unmoving in the doorway as the older soldier watched. The dark-haired youth then turned toward the doorway and froze in sudden alarm. He clenched his hand near his chest and kept his eyes fixed on the dark opening. Following the hall's disorder, he snatched a stray gem and set it on the plinth. Gems skittered across dust while a small pink denizen lunged for one. Voices barked orders as soldiers hurried into position and raised their weapons. A cloaked silhouette remained unmoving in the doorway while the older soldier watched. The dark-haired youth turned toward the opening and froze, keeping his eyes locked on the gap. He clenched his hand near his chest and refused to look away. A neon banner announced recruitment for Korean translators, displayed a Discord URL, and a small cloaked icon. After the hall's confusion, he set a stray gem on the plinth and nearby stones skittered. A small pink denizen lunged for a gem, while voices barked and soldiers moved into position with weapons raised. A cloaked silhouette remained motionless in the doorway as the older soldier watched. The dark-haired youth turned toward the opening and froze with his hand clenched at his chest. The central frame bore the title Dungeon Odyssey, and a neon recruitment banner displayed a Discord URL and a small cloaked icon. Dark-haired youth recoiled and shouted when a sudden message appeared on a nearby screen. The screen displayed a curt command and a line of recruitment text with a glowing emblem. He demanded who issued the order and then clenched his hand to steady himself. Stones shifted in the chamber while he opened his palm and studied the command. The hall remained empty except for a distant cloaked silhouette and the echoing Labyrinth voice. A neon recruitment banner lingered in the frame before the scene cut to 4 days later. 4 days later, the dark-haired youth sat alone in a bare chamber and watched a screen glow. A terse recruitment message and a glowing emblem scrolled across the display. He traced the command with a steadying hand and tested the interface as system boxes closed and opened. A bold notice declared that the Labyrinth upgrade was complete and then presented options and stark warnings about compulsory service and erase choice. The hall remained empty save for a distant cloaked figure and the echoing Labyrinth voice. He rose and walked toward the corridor where new holographic menus had appeared. After testing the new menus, the dark-haired youth moved down an empty corridor. He followed a faint sound and peered into a fractured chamber. He found a cluster of coiled bodies and egg-like sacs in a shallow pit. He stepped closer and inspected the hatchlings and shells. He frowned and whispered that it looked like a naga nest. The air shifted and a large shadow loomed above the pit. He spun and braced as an unseen thing lunged toward him. Hissing filled the passage, and the corridor flared red as the threat drew near. The dark-haired youth moved into the fractured chamber and peered into a shallow pit. He found coiled bodies, empty shells, and clustered hatchlings curled against one another. He stepped closer, inspected the eggs, and frowned at the unfamiliar anatomy. The small serpents looked back with wide eyes and made quick chirps. He spoke softly, traded short lines with the hatchlings, and tried not to startle them. A heavy shadow fell over the pit, and the air shifted toward danger. Something unseen lunged, hissing filled the corridor, and a red flare washed the stone. He spun, braced, and the panel ended on a tense, uncertain pause. The dark-haired youth moved through the fractured chamber and confirmed the eggs and hatchlings. He searched the pit and realized only one companion remained nearby. He tapped something and heard a small mechanical click. He asked where the rest had gone and tested a hope that it was a party. The mood tightened when he accepted a likely permanent loss. Someone shouted the name Sheik, and the corridor answered with clipped calls. Small denizens gathered and closed in on him. He held his ground as they advanced, tense and uncertain. The dark-haired youth moved through the fractured chamber and inspected the pit again. He found only one companion nearby and heard a faint mechanical click. He unfolded a wrapped cloth and asked if it was a map. A device announced it was updating the Labyrinth map, and a holographic overlay rose with routes and live markers. Small denizens cried the name Sheik and closed around the clearing. He held his ground, then took the map and stepped forward with the green denizen at his side. He checked rope and supplies and prepared to follow the projected path. The dark-haired youth moved through the fractured chamber and inspected a faint pit with his green companion beside him. A device chimed and projected a living map, and small denizens cried Sheik as they closed around the clearing. He studied the overlay while the green denizen urged caution. The pair traded terse words about the find. 2 cloaked figures then filled the corridor and forced a halt. The youth stepped forward and called out to stall, buying a moment as 3 small denizens waited at the threshold, and the group readied rope and supplies. The pair halted in the narrow corridor, while a small denizen cried "Sheik." The dark-haired youth agreed and glanced up at the device's living map overlay. The projection pulsed panels of text, and a disembodied voice narrated path possibilities. He read the warnings and probabilities and weighed risk against reward in silence. When the voice offered an uncertain route, the youth hesitated, then tested his plan. He spoke soft to Sheik, and the small denizen stayed at the threshold. He resolved to buy time and act on a narrow advantage if one appeared. They halted in the narrow corridor, while a small denizen called Sheik at the threshold. The dark-haired youth studied the device's living map, weighed risks, and bought time with a soft voice. He then admitted boredom and let a smile form. The nearby serpentine denizens responded by naming him Naga's king and claiming to bring him glory. He accepted the claim with a casual resolve and declared a summoning. The chamber shifted as he took position and signaled the right to call the Naga. They halted in the narrow corridor, while a small denizen named Sheik called at the threshold. The dark-haired youth studied the device's living map and bought time with a soft voice. He admitted boredom, accepted the serpentine denizen's title as Naga's king, and declared a summoning. The chamber shifted as he took position and began the rite. Light traced sigils around him. A cloaked guardian watched from the shadows with glowing eyes. The group braced as the ritual's echo swelled and the passageways answered. The dark-haired youth checked the living map and spoke about its marks aloud. He noted a single Naga denizen and called it a Naga maid. He moved into the chamber center and prepared to begin the rite. Circles of light traced sigils on the floor when he made the first motion. The rite's echo rolled through the stone and tugged at the passageways. A cloaked guardian emerged from shadow and watched with glowing eyes. The group braced as the arch answered the summoning. A Naga-kin emerged and stood before the group with a barbed spear in hand. It commented on the storage and on a Naga maid helping carry burdens. The dark-haired youth checked the arch and found the chamber better preserved than expected. He muttered approval, then read aloud the glowing captions that floated before them. The captions named a domain and hinted that one among them was heroic. The youth blinked, then asked the word aloud in obvious disbelief to himself. He walked into the great hall as the lights and echoes followed his steps. The dark-haired youth stepped into the great hall and squinted against the glare. Light flooded the chamber and silhouettes fractured into sharp shadows. A horned woman emerged from the brightness and descended the steps with composed gait. She wore layered robes and horns that swept back from her temples. The youth froze, then bowed and called her master. A quiet voice slid into his mind and registered like direct speech. He stared up and pleaded for instruction and direction. The woman listened and then noted that another among them could speak as well. The dark-haired youth stood before the horned woman and received her quiet answer. She confirmed the tutorial was not yet over. He asked if that meant more instruction. She said another among them could speak maps. The serpentine woman unfurled a display and traced corridors and nodes with patient fingers. She pointed at a hidden node immediately behind a breakable wall. The youth and the small companion watched maps shift and marked the route. The hall filled with practical focus. They agreed to proceed toward the marked node and to move carefully. The horned instructor taught them that maps functioned like a language and could be learned. She traced corridors and pointed at a hidden node behind a breakable wall. She explained that a large chamber lay beyond the barrier and that guardians filled its floors. The youth and the small companion studied the shifting map and asked practical questions about approach and method. She confirmed that the youth could learn to read and speak maps to guide their path. They agreed to move toward the marked node and to proceed quietly and carefully. The dark-haired youth and young girl discussed the planned approach to the marked node. They acknowledged the Labyrinth master's concerns about the route and consequences. The youth accepted responsibility and agreed to proceed quietly and carefully. The young companion asked for a favor and pleaded for trust. They named possible denizens, including Naga Kin and the Naga's king. They weighed the labyrinth owner's power and whether sanctuary could exist. The youth noted no nearby place would hide them from the maze. They resolved to continue toward the node and to move with caution. The dark-haired youth met with the young girl and affirmed their plan for the marked node. He steadied himself and said, "All right," then entered a cavernous hall of denizens. He addressed the gathered figures and promised, "I will do my best." A brief system panel marked a scene change and time passed. He returned above ground and reported to an older soldier in a small office. The soldier summarized veteran actions and noted the first floor progress. A domestic caregiver appeared in a quiet kitchen. She offered a tired comment as the youth listened and prepared to move on. The dark-haired youth returned and reported to the older soldier in a cramped office. The soldier summarized veteran actions and asked about first-floor progress and the marked node. The youth explained his plan and described risks inside the denizen halls. The older soldier warned of hell spiders and offered payment or a rank for the job. The youth refused both offers and insisted on proceeding without compensation now. The soldier pressed him about motives and whether he could endure those dangers. The youth remained composed and repeated his refusal with quiet certainty again. The soldier sighed and the room fell into a heavy quiet then. The dark-haired youth turned and walked out after repeating his refusal. The older soldier called after him, mentioning family and the youth's situation. The youth stopped, then struck out with a sudden motion. The older soldier reeled and hit the floor, eyes wide and sweating. The corridor filled with a sharp sound and scattering debris. The youth's face emerged from shadow, one eye small and hard. He asked if they had done a background check on him. The question landed like a threat and broke the room's fragile distance. The image presented a recruitment message for Korean translators across a dark panel. Bold lines announced open applications and urged readers to join the group's Discord. The invite URL Asura GG/Discord stood centered. Neon-style lettering contrasted against the dark background and framed the call to action. A hooded avatar occupied the upper right, evoking the cloaked figure emblem. No further contact details or qualifications appeared. The page served as a concise call for volunteers to apply through the community channel. The panel presented a recruitment call framed in neon purple and stark black. Bold headings announced open applications for Korean translators and volunteers to join. The invite link Discord, GG/Asuraskans and site Asuraskanscom were centered on the page. A large title read Dungeon Odyssey, with staff credits listed across the right panel. The hooded avatar evoked the cloaked figure emblem and stared from the upper right. Illustrated figures appeared in a boxed portrait at left alongside the Asuraskans branding. The page read as a stark community recruitment poster and group credit splash. The older soldier raised his voice and ordered them to stay calm. He warned that the creatures were not gentle and the labyrinth punished carelessness. The dark-haired youth bristled and argued about the team's readiness and duty. They spoke about families and the stakes for those with children in the camp. The older soldier insisted on precautions and asked for a promise to protect loved ones. The youth conceded and agreed to take the mission if details were sent immediately. A young girl and others listened in quiet tension as the plan solidified. The older soldier had warned them not to mention the babies, and the group tried to stay silent. A hushed comment about dungeon babies floated, and then a voice screamed for everyone to run. Cal stood frozen, soot on his face as panic spread. The hall erupted with creatures that struck people down and dragged others to the floor. Someone crawled and pleaded why as limbs and bodies fell. A name was shouted into the dark, and a massive shadow with glowing red eyes stepped forward. The survivors faced the advancing horror and dread swallowed the room. After the earlier warning and the hall's chaos, a monstrous shadow with red eyes had enveloped the scene. Dominic snapped upright, gasping as he awoke from a nightmare. Small unknown denizens cried out, and one called him master. The cloaked figure rushed over and asked if he was okay. Dominic admitted he had dreamed about the past, but dismissed it as nothing. The tiny unknown denizens exchanged distracted comments, noting the attackers did not look very labyrinthine. Tension lingered in the air as survivors steadied themselves and watched the dark beyond. Dominic sat with the young girl and spoke about the maze's present dangers and recent changes. He explained he had grown less nervous after learning nearby floors harbored people, spiders, and deeper floor beasts. The young girl asked the upgrade status, and Dominic said only seconds remained before the rank upgrade to the Labyrinth. A green display then announced the Labyrinth core had been found. Small unknown denizen clustered in the corridor and survivors took positions. The group steeled themselves as danger and a system shift approached. Dominic had sat beside the young girl and briefed the group on immediate dangers. He explained that nearby floors harbored survivors, spiders, and more dangerous deep-floor beasts. A green system display announced the Labyrinth core had been found and that a rank upgrade was imminent. Unknown denizen clustered in the corridor, while survivors took positions around the console to read the incoming data. The display scrolled a list of approaching denizens and possible spawn locations. An alarm blared and the Labyrinth voice warned that a coordinated attack was incoming. Dominic ordered the group to brace and prepare for immediate engagement. Tension tightened quickly as a serpentine guardian appeared at the corridor mouth. The group read the system display that listed incoming denizens, spawn locations, and countdowns. An alarm sounded, and the Labyrinth voice announced a coordinated assault. Dominic confirmed the core discovery and the pending rank upgrade while survivors clustered at the console. Icons and timers ticked down as relief and excitement mixed across the team. The young girl and others praised Dominic briefly before a dark silhouette fell across the corridor mouth. A massive serpentine guardian then slithered into view, and the group braced as they moved toward the doorway. The Nagakin slid into view, and the dark-haired youth watched with a brief smile. He then grew serious while he appraised the denizens. He and the young girl leaned toward two small unknown denizen and asked about the creatures. The small denizens spoke plainly and identified a child among the group. They said the child differed from those born normally and suggested it followed humans. The team considered how denizens replicated yet lacked certain traits of natural birth. Quiet worry spread across the team as they weighed origin and consequence.